Is the New Testament true and reliable? Is Jesus really the Son of God? Is he truly God, like the Gospels claim? Is the Old Testament reliable as the New Testament? Are they both history, not just some legends? Do we have proof for all of this outside the Bible? Do we have archaeology proving the Bible correct?
There are two questions now we need to investigate when we're looking at the New Testament. We know miracles are possible, but we're now trying to see if any other miracles have occurred to confirm that Jesus is truly who he said he was.
Let's discuss all of that. This is the Orthodox Project. Let's start. In the beginning, there was nothing, and then boom, something so precise, so perfect. That is our universe, as we discussed in the previous episodes. So if that's possible, the rest is kind of easier compared to the creation of the universe. So everything else is at the very least possible. So the resurrection is not a fantasy anymore. The resurrection is not something unbelievable and something you can't believe in and some fairy tales. No, it's true, and it's a fact, and it's history. How do I know it's history? Let's talk about it, okay? Are the New Testament manuscripts accurate? Are they true? Are they saying truth? Were they forged? Did the disciples lie? Is this something truly that was written and recorded accurately? Did the Lord really rise from the dead? Because if the Lord Jesus Christ really rose from the dead, then everything else kind of comes with it. What does that mean? The Lord Jesus Christ talked about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Noah and Jonah and all of these Old Testament characters and all these Old Testament prophets, right? So if he is true, if he's truly the Son of God, and how do we know he's the Son of God? He has power over humanity, over death, over sickness, over everything in this universe because he is God. If he's truly God, if he's truly who he says he is, that means he's truth. And truth does not lie. So if he says Abraham is a real guy, he's a real guy. If he says Adam and Eve are real people, then they're real people. If he says Noah is a real person, real person. If he says Sodom and Gomorrah really happened, then it really happened, right? Why? Because he's God. If we can prove he's God, if we can prove and see, oh, he's not a human. Something, oh yeah, sure, yes, he has full humanity, but he's not just a human. No, he is God in the flesh. If we can prove that, then everything else comes with it. The Old Testament and the New Testament comes with it, right? Because the Lord, right, affirmed the authenticity of the Old Testament. The Lord quoted from the Old Testament. So what we're going to do now is we're going to prove the authenticity and accuracy of the New Testament. Because if Jesus really rose from the dead, like the New Testament says in the 4 Gospels and in the epistles, if he really did rise, then Scripture is true. Therefore, the Christian God is the true God. We already discussed and proved that God exists. Now, let's discuss which God. We already eliminated pantheism and polytheism and all other isms. We already know it's a monotheistic God from all the previous episodes. This episode, we discuss which monotheistic God. Our God made it clear. Our God did the one thing no one in the history of the human race was able to do. The one thing no one, not one human, escaped. Death. He defeated death to prove to us, among other things, the power that he will grant us. He showed us that he has the power to deify us. He showed that we can be in him, alive, even if we go through death. Let's discuss the accuracy and the authenticity of the New Testament. Do we have an accurate copy of the New Testament manuscripts? Do we have an original copy of the New Testament? Do we have the actual writings of the apostles? No. Okay, and we're going to discuss why. Okay, but do we have an accurate copy of the original written words that the disciples and apostles wrote? Okay, so that's the first question. Okay, do we have an accurate copy? The second question is, do the original New Testament documents tell the truth? Because you can have an accurate copy, but the copy could be lying. The disciples could be lying. So, do we have an accurate copy? That's first. And then, is the New Testament true? Is it truly what happened? Did Jesus really come, really die, really rise from the dead, really ascend into heaven and sent us the Holy Spirit? Did that really happen? Let's discuss, okay? First question, do we have an accurate copy of the original New Testament documents?
If we can't trust the New Testament, we can't trust what we think we know about Jesus of Nazareth, and there's no such thing as authentic Christianity. Let's look at this more closely. The New Testament and all significant literature from the ancient world is reconstructed into its original form by comparing manuscript copies that have survived. To determine the reliability of this reconstruction, historians ask 3 questions. How many copies exist? How long is the time gap between when the original was written and when the earliest surviving copy was made? And how significant are the differences between the copies? The experts have more confidence in their reconstruction of the original text when there are lots of copies to work with, the time gap is short, and the differences are relatively insignificant. Historians are confident they have reconstructed the original works of Plato and Homer with a high degree of accuracy. So let's compare these works to the New Testament. We have 219 copies of Plato, 2,300 copies of Homer, but when it comes to the New Testament, we have an overwhelming 5,700 manuscript copies in the original Greek alone. In comparison with the average ancient Greek author, the New Testament copies are well over 1,000 times more plentiful. If the average size manuscript were 2½ inches thick, all the copies of the works of the average Greek author would stack up 4 feet high, while the copies of the New Testament would stack up to over a mile high. This is indeed an embarrassment of riches. But how much time elapsed between the original writings and the earliest surviving manuscript copy? 1,300 years passed before the first surviving copy of Plato was written, and only 400 years for Homer. How about the New Testament? Just 35 years. In the world of ancient literature, this is a blink of an eye. The wealth of material that is available for determining the wording of the original New Testament is absolutely stunning. But these manuscripts are not identical. In fact, they contain roughly 400,000 differences. The obvious question then is, how significant are these variations? Most of them are simply variations in spelling, which are easy to sort out. Then we find minor differences, such as the use of synonyms or a definite article with a proper name. These have no effect on translation. There are also errors that scholars have determined were not in the original text. That means that less than 1% of all the variants have any real significance at all for the meaning of the original text. And none of these, not one, affects a single core doctrine of the Christian faith. Furthermore, in their various writings, early church leaders quoted the New Testament over 1 million times. So extensive are these citations that if all the other sources for our knowledge of the text of the New Testament were destroyed, they would be sufficient alone for the reconstruction of practically the entire New Testament. The overabundance of early and accurate manuscripts, and quotations from those manuscripts, combined to make reconstruction of the original Greek text of the New Testament virtually certain. The books of the New Testament you read today are the same as the original writings, penned nearly 2,000 years ago.
We have such early manuscripts of the New Testament documents to the point where they don't even come close to anything we believe is history, right? You believe in Caesar, you believe in Alexander the Great, you believe in all of this Roman history, you believe in all of these wars that happen in the ancient world, you believe in all of these ancient civilizations. When it comes to the New Testament, the manuscripts of the New Testament are very close to the actual events of the New Testament. What does that mean? For example, there would be a war in ancient Egypt, and then the war would be recorded, right, on walls or in tombs or manuscripts and on papyrus, right? These wars will be recorded hundreds or couple hundred years after the actual event would happen. We would still believe the war happened because of the manuscripts. That's how archaeology works. Okay? If there is corroborating evidence, if there's corroborating evidence that, hey, there is more evidence outside of this document that shows that, hey, this war really didn't happen, then yeah, we believe this document, right? What happened is the New Testament, right, is not like the rest. The war didn't happen and then a couple hundred years later, the war was recorded. No. The New Testament actually happened. First century events happened. The Lord came and he really did do all these miracles, and he really did die, and he really did rise from the dead. And then, right after, right, literally in the same age, in the same time of the eyewitnesses, the New Testament documents were recorded. The New Testament was written while the eyewitnesses were still alive. Therefore, if the New Testament documents were false, the eyewitnesses could have said, no, this does not happen. No, Jesus did not die. No, Jesus did not rise from the dead. No, we did not see Jesus do the miracles. We actually have proof that even the critics of Christianity from the 1st, 2nd, 3rd century knew that these events truly took place. They just didn't like that they took place. So they called these supernatural things, they called them magic, or they called them sorcery, right? They called what the Lord did sorcery and magic because they couldn't disprove the fact that the Lord did miracles. Okay? So the New Testament documents were written so early to a point where it was impossible for anybody to refute the fact that these are real events. People took those events and interpreted it as they liked, right? Some people rejected Christ, some people believed in Christ. But the fact that these events took place, undeniable. Okay, so the first thing is earlier manuscripts. The second thing is we have more manuscripts of the New Testament than all the other things we consider history. The third thing is more accurately copied than all the other things we also consider reliable when we discuss history. There are so many atheists in the world that study these manuscripts. And for the last 200 years, all they have been doing, Christians and atheists and agnostics, people who don't believe in Christianity, all they were doing is trying to disprove Christianity. The easiest way to disprove Christianity is to disprove the manuscripts. Why do you think that didn't happen yet? Why do you think no one is able to disprove them? Because they know. This is undeniable. The fact that these manuscripts are early, these manuscripts are copied accurately, these manuscripts are quoted in other works as well. These manuscripts, the fourth point is more abundantly supported manuscripts. Okay? What does that mean? They are quoted in other manuscripts. What does that mean? The New Testament documents became so popular in the 1st and 2nd century to the point where by the 2nd century, the middle of the 2nd century, just about 150 AD, people were quoting from the New Testament, and they were quoting from it, not even mentioning which document this comes from. Why am I mentioning that? That means what? People knew already of the authenticity and the widespread authentic New Testament. They already knew that these documents are out there. They knew that the epistles existed. They knew that the Gospels were around and they were common knowledge, right? It's like me quoting from the Constitution. If I tell you the first line of the Constitution, everybody knows it. Why? Because it's common knowledge. I don't need to tell you that this comes from the Constitution because, hey, it's common knowledge. Same idea, right? For example, if you look at the Epistle of Barnabas, or you look at some of the writings of Saint Irenaeus of Lyon, or you look at some of the other writings from the 2nd century, right? You look at Justin Martyr, right? Or anybody like that, right? They are quoting from Scripture, right? They are quoting from the New Testament as well as the Old Testament. And they're not mentioning, oh, this is the epistle of St. Paul to the Hebrews, or the epistle of St. James to whatever. They are just saying these quotes from these epistles and discussing these quotes as if everybody they're talking to already knows that these quotes are reliable and authentic. We all believe that people like Plato and Caesar and Pliny existed. How do we know that these people existed? Because around, for example, let's look at Plato, right? Around 1,200 years after Plato, people talked about Plato, and 7 remaining documents. So today we only have 7 documents that talk about Plato, and they were written 1,200 years after Plato died, and we all believe Plato existed. When we look at the New Testament, right? The New Testament, we have 5,680 something manuscripts of the New Testament, and they were written around 25 years after the Lord rose from the dead. Not 1,000, 25 years only after the fact. That's the age of the eyewitnesses. That's the age of the eyewitnesses. Again, if I'm making up a lie, I don't want to include people that are alive with me in the lie, because if I'm lying and I say, hey, Cyril was with me in this place, and that's a lie, all we have to do is go ask Cyril, and Cyril will tell me, hey, no, I was not there with whatever, right? So same idea here, right? The New Testament documents are so much more, right? Compared to Plato, we only have 7 documents. We have Caesar, we only have 10 documents talking about Caesar, right? Today, all the knowledge we have about Caesar comes from 10 documents. And we still believe Caesar existed. We have 5,000 manuscripts from the New Testament, and we don't believe the New Testament. Really? Do we have the original writings of the Gospels, for example? Do we have the actual first copy that St. Luke wrote of the Gospel of St. Luke, right? Or the first copy of the book of Acts, right? That St. Luke wrote also, okay? So we don't actually have the first original copy. Why? God, in his wisdom, did not allow for the original copy to be still around. Why? Because let's say I have this original copy. I am here and I have the original copy that St. Luke wrote himself, right? The Gospel according to Luke, okay? So I actually have this manuscript, okay? And people start copying all of these manuscripts of the Gospel of Luke, and it spreads all around the world, and they all copy from the manuscript I have, okay? What can I do eventually that would not be good? Let's say I'm a heretic. All I have to do is, you know what? I don't like this verse. I don't like this specific passage. So what can I do? I can just, hey, I'm going to cross it out, or I'm going to cut this part out, or I'm going to remove this page, right? I'm going to remove this section, right? And then everybody else is going to look and be like, oh, shoot, the original that here Paul or Michael has, right? The original that I have doesn't have this story. Therefore, you all must remove this verse from your Bibles as well. Okay? So if there is an original copy that is still with us today, there is more room for corruption. There's more room for somebody to abuse this original copy and start changing things according to his own thoughts and according to his own ideas. In God's wisdom, in his full amazing wisdom, he did not allow for there to be an original still with us today. If we have an original, somebody could take hold of that original, change things, and tell everybody else, hey, the original says this, therefore you must also change your copies. But what happens is, because we all have copies, if one of us changes a verse, what is everybody else going to say? No, that's not what the gospel says. If
Mark and Luke and Stephen and Justin and Maria and Marina and Veronica and Jesse and Christina and Myrna
and all of these people that have all these copies say that this verse is in the Gospel of Luke, if I come out and say, oh, this part doesn't exist in the original copy, everybody else is going to be like, no, we all have this same exact verse, you can't change it, right? And some people are going to say, oh, there is differences in the New Testament documents, okay? The differences are as subtle as this.
Right, first copy we have this, and then second is this. You see here, right, an example of these different mistakes, right?
Can you construct the original from such little mistakes as what you see on the screen right now? Yes, absolutely.
Of these 200 to 300, or maybe even 400,000 points of conflict amongst the New Testament manuscripts, a full 70% can be chalked up to grammar or spelling mistakes. Now, if I'm to be truthful, I'm not sure I know how to spell the word occasionally. I hate that about myself. I'm lazy because of autocorrect and because of spell check, but are there 2 C's? Is there an A and an I in there? I could have looked it up for this video, but that wouldn't be honest. I don't know how to spell it. There, now you know I'm a total fraud. But you know what? You're a total fraud too, because I bet you there's some word that you should know how to spell that you don't know how to spell. Hey, come on, even relatively competent people don't know how to spell everything. We have blind spots. What can you do? Well, these copyists who were doing this manuscript work back in the day were just like you or me. They had the occasional blind spot. See what I did there? I like that. And so they would screw something up as they were copying out of habit or just memorizing a wrong spelling of a word. But further, let's say they were better than you and me, and they didn't have any words they ever misspelled because they're so smart. Well, guess what? The Greek that was used in the New Testament is different than the Greek that was in circulation at the time that they were copying. I mean, that's hundreds of years for it to evolve. Think about how different English sounds from Shakespeare. That was just 400 years ago. These manuscripts, some of them are further apart than that. So what they did is we see spelling mistakes where they used more modern renderings of words in place of the old school version of Greek. The same way, if you were copying something from an older document where British use of the word color, C-O-L-O-U-R, was in place, you might just in your brain be like, oh, well, I want to make this make sense to the people I'm copying this for, C-O-L-O-R, good enough. Obviously, that does nothing to change the meaning, and 70% of these hundreds of thousands of errors or conflicts can be written off and diagnosed as simply as that. A second way that conflicts entered the original manuscripts is that we see evidence of copyists working on one thing, looking away, and looking back and skipping a section. Maybe the ending of a line over here on the original looked a lot like the ending of the next line, and so maybe they would jump ahead a line. Maybe a few letters at the end of a word looked like a few letters at the end of another word that was close by, and so they would jump ahead to that. There are 50 different ways that if you're copying one thing from another thing, looking back and forth, you could just lose your place a little bit and mess it up. If you go and do this exercise in English, it's really easy to figure out where you made a mistake. And the people who study Greek for a living have just as easy a time looking at those scribal errors and being like, oh, they just skipped a couple of lines, no problem there. That again accounts for a large percentage of the errors or conflicts in the New Testament manuscripts. A third way that some of these errors pop up in the manuscripts is that the scribes who did the work just aren't very good at being scribes. Like, look, they're all way better than I am. I'm sure they all knew Greek better than I do, but they just weren't as precise as some of the professional scribes. And so as a result, you see maybe some guys who didn't know Greek super well just imitating the shapes of the characters as they went along, not really knowing what they were writing down. And that is going to be detectable by a Greek expert looking back on it today. The same way, if you watch a movie with somebody who doesn't speak English, and they have a line in English, and they clearly just memorized the sounds of the words, and the inflection's all wrong and off, you might tip your hat to that person for being brave enough to try it, but you can tell they don't really know what they're saying, and so it's a diminished quality of performance as you look at it. Fourth, and I think really fun and interesting way that some of these conflicts get introduced into the text, is that scribes clearly came across a cluster of words that could be read and assembled in one way to have one reasonable meaning, or read in a slightly different way to have a different reasonable meaning. And it all just comes down to where you put the word breaks and the mental pauses. Check this out. For example, let's say somebody says to me, hey, could you get the door, Matt? Well, I assume that means you want me to open the door. I got the door, Matt. Or it could mean you want me to go and get this door, Matt. They both work. Well, again, and this is kind of a repeated theme, intuitively, you get that in English, and likewise, a good Greek scholar can figure that out in Greek. A fifth way that conflicts make it into the manuscripts is through the process of a scribe listening to someone dictate the text as they write it down. We know that this is one way that copying happened. And the thing about that is, sometimes you hear stuff that isn't there. This is going to be a little bit weird, but I want to talk about something uncomfortable for just a minute, and that's gay porn. And the reason it's uncomfortable to talk about is because of all of the maritime disasters that happened as people sailed around Cape Horn. In a room full of copyists where you sit there all day long listening to a dude read a thing to you and you have to copy it, surely someone is going to hear a word wrong here or there. And again, in the same way that you could understand that potential little mix-up, so an expert in manuscript work can detect those kind of auditory issues very easily. A sixth way that errors got introduced into the manuscripts was simply by notes in the margin or in between the lines of the text that copyists were making to interact with other copyists, accidentally being taken for part of the Bible by a future copyist. Now, it's very easy to sort that out in the same way that if you go to cakerex.com and look at ways that cake decorators screw up instructions on cakes, you can tell what went wrong every single time. Like if you look at a cake and the cake literally says, write happy birthday Henry right here in purple. Like, you know that what it should have said is happy birthday Henry, and that the frosting should have been purple frosting. It's a copyist mistake, and it's understandable, and if you can figure that one out, you can also figure out what's going wrong with those manuscript errors. A seventh way that conflicts in the manuscripts are introduced is by copyists just making poor judgment calls. I read about, I think they call it Codex 109, where a copyist was drawing from a 2-column manuscript, and I think he was moving it toward a 1-column manuscript and how he was doing it. And he got it right throughout the whole thing, but he got to a genealogy section in Luke, and rather than continuing to read down a column and then down the next column, he read across. And so it completely scrambled the account of the family tree of Jesus. Mistakes like this, again, are glaring and easy to sort through. An eighth way, I think we're on 8, I don't know, something like an eighth way that errors get introduced into the manuscript is simply over the question of word order. If you've studied Spanish, you know that word order in Spanish is less important to the meaning of a sentence than it is in English. And Greek is the same way. So a lot of times we don't notice these word order mistakes where a Greek scholar, or a Greek scribe rather, would just order it the way it sounds right in their head, but it doesn't really matter. We don't notice that until we try to put it into English or a more rigid language where word order is really important. Whenever people get to a place in life where we believe something so completely that we integrate it into our identity, that we build our worldview around it, that we defend it, that we put our reputation next to it, there is going to be a temptation, regardless of what you believe, to recoil at facts that don't seem to match with our presuppositions. And I know that there's a temptation when we look at the nuts and bolts of the Bible to be like, I like simple faith better. I like to imagine that God just gave us a Bible from somewhere and it's true and I can trust it and that's it. Well, you know what? I think it's true and I think you can trust it, but I think it's true and trustworthy precisely because of what happens when we dig into it honestly and look at the backstory. Are there errors in the biblical manuscripts or conflicts, whatever you want to call them? Yeah, tons of them. But you know what? It would be freakishly weird and scary and smack of falsehood if there weren't. I mean, think about the alternative here. What if we had 5,700 Greek manuscripts and another 20,000 or so in other languages after the fact, and they all said exactly the same thing? And we knew that anything that hinted at anything else was destroyed. We would know that there was some central power behind all of this, making Christianity happen, whether you want it or not. And there are moments in history that look like that in Europe, but that's much later than when these manuscripts start being around. Now, the fact that we see variety and human intervention occurring here, that we see spelling errors and normal people stuff, that we even see a few things that smack of slight regional preferences for how to say things, just says all the more. This is a decentralized movement, and maybe there actually is a deity behind it. Simply put, people are people, and the mistakes that they made when they wrote things and read things back in the day are a lot like the mistakes that we make today. It's not really that hard to wrap our brain around how those mistakes got there. All the way back in the 1st century, the toothpaste was still in the tube. You had the original authors of the New Testament writing the original autographs of the Bible. People figure out it's really important, they start to copy it. We get into the 2nd century AD, and you've got all kinds of copies of the Bible floating around, but you've also got early church leaders quoting it left and right, like 1 million quotations from the New Testament amongst those early church leaders alone. So we have a ton of stuff floating around in terms of what is the Bible, even by the 2nd century. Well, into the 3rd and 4th century, people are really thinking in terms of one unified book made up of several smaller documents, being the New Testament. And they start to bind it up like we bind up books today, and these are called codexes or codices. I have no idea how to actually pluralize that, but you get the idea. It's a book like our Bible today. Well, then we get into the 5th century, and we run into a new problem. 400 years have gone by. 400 years is a long time. Think about what you know about how English sounded 400 years ago. Well, that's what the deal is with Greek. People don't really speak the version of Greek that was popular when the Bible was written anymore. Things have evolved, and some people don't speak Greek at all. In fact, the lingua franca of the West becomes Latin, especially of the Church West. So the Roman Catholic Church commissions this guy named Jerome to make a Latin translation from the Greek of the New Testament. Now what we have are copies of Greek manuscripts being made, copies of Latin manuscripts being made, copies of Coptic manuscripts being made that's an Egyptian language, and a bunch of other languages. So all told, we end up with about 5,700 Greek manuscripts and another 20,000 or so manuscripts of the New Testament in other languages, in part or in whole, by the time we get to the invention of the printing press in the 1400s. That printing press is a move toward popularity, because instead of having one dude sit there and write the whole thing out, you can have this movable type press that can crank out, literally I guess, versions of the Bible or copies of the Bible again and again and again. Well, as a result, there's this hunger for the Bible. People want it, but we got a problem. Like, the version of the Bible that's being copied is in Latin. Nobody speaks Latin anymore. It's been ages since people meaningfully spoke Latin. So what do you do if you only speak English or German? I guess you're just out of luck. You can't know God, right? Well, they're like, no, we want the Bible. So scholars start to look at it and they think, well, we don't want to make a translation into English from a translation into Latin that maybe gets back to sort of what the source material is. we want to do an end run around the Latin and just do a direct translation from the original Greek. So we're going to need the original Greek. How do we get that? Well, even though there are tons of manuscripts floating around, the world was a lot smaller back then. People didn't have access to all of that. It wasn't all cataloged. So this genius scholar from Rotterdam, a guy named Erasmus, sits down and gathers 5, and 5 was a lot at this time, manuscripts almost complete of the New Testament. And he cross-references them together to produce one edition of the Greek New Testament. And some of it he had to retrofit from Latin at the end of Revelation because he didn't quite have all of it, but it's pretty dang good for what he had to work with. He puts that into circulation in the 1500s, which, if you remember your church history, is when the great big religious shakeup called the Protestant Reformation happened. So rock stars of the Reformation like Luther latch on to that, and he produces, in fact, a German New Testament based on Erasmus's Greek New Testament. Other scholars, a printer from Paris named Stephanus, a reformer from Switzerland named Beza, do more work with Erasmus's stuff, and they produce several editions that eventually get handed off to the English, and this becomes the source of the King James Bible. So the King James of the 17th century is not based on 25,000 manuscripts. It's based on 5-ish, maybe 7, depending on how you count. And look, I need to be straightforward about this. What they accomplished with what they had is phenomenal. But what they had were very late manuscript copies from the Middle Ages, not the early stuff that was way closer to the original autographs. There's an advertisement that a printer who likes to sell Bibles puts together somewhere in the 17th century saying, "Read the King James Bible! It is based on the Greek text received by all." And the Latin for that, which my wife is way better at that than me, but I'm pretty sure I'm reading this right, is Textus Receptus. And so the nickname for the Greek text behind the King James is Textus Receptus. Textus Receptus wins the day in biblical scholarship for the next couple hundred years in Europe. But then we get into the 1800s, and people in the know are realizing that the world is shrinking. We're getting a much better sense of all of these manuscripts we have floating around. We have much earlier manuscripts now than we did at the time of Erasmus and the King James. Maybe we need to revisit our source Greek material. And so some smart people start looking at this and they figure out, whoa. This early stuff looks like it is one text family of content. In other words, it has the same quirks and handwriting styles and trivial little spelling differences and all of this, but then it looks like there's this whole other family that's somewhere split off from that is overwhelmingly accurate as well, but it has all of these little proclivities and stylistic preferences and spelling preferences over here. Curious. In total, scholars come to think that there are maybe 4 old school manuscript families of the Bible. And so in the 19th century, in the 1800s, they start doing the math on it and saying, we can come up with a better Greek New Testament. But all scholarship is informed by the in vogue ideas of the day. Well, the French Revolution had just happened, the American Revolution had just happened, the Latin American revolutions are happening, it's freedom and democracy everywhere, and people start thinking, you know what? The best way to determine what the true and original New Testament is, the best way to put the toothpaste back into the tube is to just add up all the manuscripts we have, and anywhere there's a discrepancy, we just take a vote. And if we have 5,000 manuscripts and 4,903 say this, then we're going with that. And so in the 19th century, we see the advent of what are called majority manuscripts. It's a second technique for how to put the toothpaste back in the tube. These scholars propose the most difficult process of all for putting the toothpaste back in the tube. They propose going conflict by conflict through the hundreds of thousands of points of conflict among the manuscripts to figure out what to do with each one, and then to annotate that so that other people can duplicate their work and reason it through for themselves. This third approach for how to put the toothpaste back in the tube becomes known as the eclectic text, or the eclectic approach. When we try to resolve historical problems, the best way to figure it out is the same way you would go and figure out any riddle in your life. You'd consider tons of evidence. You would add up motive and probability. You would compare what the majority says versus what the minority says. You would consider what the earliest and most reliable evidence on your question might be, and all of those are taken into account to produce this thing. Then, this thing is translated into English or whatever other language you might speak to create the Bibles that most of us read in this day and age. I feel great confidence in the text we have in front of us. I feel great confidence in the process that goes into it. But you know what's really cool about this? You don't have to take my word for that. You don't have to take anybody's word for that, because you can do this work for yourself if you really care to. But a good place to start is this book right here, Learn to Read New Testament Greek. It's exactly what the title says it is. It's only that thick. It starts on the assumption that we know nothing about this language, and it gives us a basic nuts and bolts introduction in a way that you can get quickly. Now, this is not going to make you fluent in first century Greek the way you might strive to be fluent in Spanish after 8 semesters in high school and 2 more in college, but we don't need to speak Greek. What we're working on here is a study language. We need to get to a place where, for starters, we can just basically decode simple Greek and understand a few grammatical principles so that we can start to get into the world of some of the resources I'm going to show you in a minute. Reading books that span the spectrum of a field help you to understand the discussion, and then when we're done listening to that conversation for a while, we figure out where we might be able to fit into it. So we're going to start easy. This book, The New Testament Manuscripts, or Documents rather, Are They Reliable by F.F. Bruce. This dude, full disclosure, is a committed Christian. He's enthusiastic about the Bible, and he's going to give you a nice argument for why it checks out and it's reliable, and it's tiny and short, so if you just want to get the super basic intro and gist, that's a great place to start. Take his presuppositions into account as you do. This book by Ewert, From Ancient Tablets to Modern Translations, is one that I've been working through. I could only find a used copy, but I really like this book. It assumes that the reader is competent, but doesn't assume that the reader is great at Greek. But this thing gives you all kinds of examples from specific manuscripts of particular issues and questions here and there without overwhelming you. So it's a really nice next layer deep after you get done with Bruce. The next layer deep after that is this book that I have gone all the way through. This is Paul Wegner's A Journey from Text to Translations, and I've beat the snot out of this thing. I've taken it fishing with me and all over the place. This really takes you through the whole story of what Christians have done, a lot of the same subject matter that I've talked about in the last couple of videos. Again, tons of great examples, very understandable, doesn't assume that you know too much Greek, but takes a little deeper dive than Ewert. But I want to wrap up with something that is something of a response to that book. Daniel Wallace is another rock star of text criticism. I'm going to talk more about some online resources he has in a minute. This guy is a part of Bible.org. I think he works out of Dallas, and he is stunningly brilliant. Wallace responds to some of Ehrman's gripes or critiques or questions about the manuscript in this book, and so I think it's a great way to wrap all of that up. I know that we're already to the point of maybe feeling overwhelmed with how much content this is, but hey, we're halfway home, and again, this is all stuff we can do. This guy right here, Daniel Wallace, is the head of an organization called the Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscripts. That's right, so csntm.org, and what they're doing is gradually cataloging the entire manuscript record supporting the New Testament, which means you can just go and look it up for yourself for free on whatever device you're watching this video on right now.
Sir Frederick Kenyon said, "It cannot be strongly asserted that in substance the text of the Bible is certain, especially is the case with the New Testament." Do the original New Testament documents tell the truth?
So we do have an accurate copy of the original New Testament. But the more interesting question for our purposes is question 2. Do the original New Testament documents tell the truth? Because we could have an accurate copy of a lie, right? All right, let's take a look at the evidence. Here we go. Question number 2.